What's going on, guys? Matt aka Martin here. I don't have a lot of time today, but I wanted to bring you a really quick video. So what I thought I'd do is show you a really cool little tip, technique, trick, way to create like a pseudo-return chain as an insert effect in Ableton Live. So without any further ado, let's jump right into it and show you the process. Okay, so here I am inside Ableton Live. I've just got a really basic project here with a kind of short little 8-bar 4-bar synth line arpeggio loop thing. Sounds pretty dry, sounds like this. Cool. So what I want to do is add some reverb and some delay to this to spice it up a little bit. But instead of just adding reverb and delay as an insert, what I'm going to do is create kind of a pseudo return chain inside of this track as an insert. And I'm going to show you why that's useful and how I'm going to do it. So first thing I'm going to do is just double click and add a reverb to this track. Boom. And then make this reverb 100% wet. Next thing I'm going to do is group this device. So I'm going to click on the device title, hit Command G, and that's going to group it to an audio effect rack. Then I'm going to click this second little icon from the top on the left here, which is the show and hide chain list icon. Click that, and then right click and create a new chain. Now, anyone who's done any sort of parallel processing or whatever is probably familiar with this way of working. You have like your kind of wet chain, which is the top chain here, which is your 100% wet effect, and then your dry chain, which is the bottom one here. So I'm just going to name them accordingly. So now I essentially have control over the reverb just as a reverb, and then I can also control the level of it as well as the level of the dry signal, and not have to worry about the kind of dry wet percentage knob in a normal reverb or some kind of other plugin inside of Ableton. Why this is useful is I get really good control over the volume of the reverb and the volume of the dry signal, which sometimes that dry wet knob doesn't quite give me. So now we have something that sounds like this. And as you can see, I can change the level of the reverb independently from the level of the dry signal. Really useful. But what I'm going to do is take this a little step further and create essentially a return chain inside of this rack. So I'm going to do this by adding a few different things and then using macros to help me control it. So I'm going to add a utility before the reverb on the wet chain. Then I'm going to right click on the gain knob and map it to macro 1. And then we can see that this first macro here is now mapped to this gain knob, and it's got the full scale of that parameter there. So from -infinity all the way up to 35 decibels. But what I'm going to do is make it so that this gain knob only goes to 0 decibels, so that we can only ever send the maximum amount of signal, dry signal, to this reverb. I'm going to do that by hitting this map button up here. That'll change this browser view into kind of like a mappings view. And then on the max, I'm just going to type 0. Now, if I go back to get rid of the map and go back to this normal view, so this gain knob here only goes up to 0 decibels and all the way down to -infinity. Much like our send and return knobs, right? They only go all the way up to 0 decibels and down to -infinity decibels. So now I've essentially created a send knob inside of our audio effect rack. In order to make this like a proper kind of return chain, the next thing we want to do is also map the level of our wet and the level of our dry. So what I'm going to do is the exact same process. I'm just going to right click on our little wet knob here. I'm just going to map this to macro 8. And then I'm going to rename this chain volume that's popped up here in macro 8. I'm just going to rename this to wet. And then I'm going to do the exact same thing with dry. And I'm going to right click on that chain volume, map it to macro 7, and call it dry. Now I'm going to leave these as their full scale because that's really useful if we want to be able to boost the wet or boost the dry above that 0 decibel mark. And now essentially we've created this kind of return chain, right? So if we don't have any gain on our utility effect going into our reverb, we're not going to hear anything coming out of that wet chain. And as soon as we up that gain knob, we're going to be starting to send to that reverb. Then we can also control the level of that reverb. And the level of the dry. And we have control over each of these different parameters independently from just this dry wet control knob. So the next thing you can do is map things like your decay time, your pre-delay, your size of the reverb, all that kind of stuff to these other 5 macro knobs that you've got available. So I might want to map my decay time to macro 2. I might want to map my pre-delay to something like macro 3, my size to macro 4, and then also just play around with different ranges for the mappings of each of these effects as well. So for example, I might want to be able to go all the way to 60 seconds with my decay time. I might only want to be able to go to like 30 seconds. So I'd type in 30,000 because that's just how that works. And then maybe the pre-delay, I only want to be able to go to like 100 milliseconds. And the room size, maybe I only want to be able to go to, maybe I only want the room size lowest to be like 10 and the highest to be something like 350. Play around with it, see what works for you. And then what we can do is just set like a really basic kind of starting value for each of these. So I might want my decay time to be something like 2 seconds, pre-delay to be something like 2.5 milliseconds, which is the standard, and the room size to be at 100, which is again the standard. And then I can just rename these macro knobs to maybe more useful names, color them. So I could rename this to send. I could rename decay, pre-delay, and then size. And maybe I want to color them differently as well. I could color this wet knob to something like yellow, color the dry knob to something like black or something. Send maybe also yellow, different kind of yellow, decay, red, just whatever kind of works for you. You don't have to color them if you don't want to, but it can be really nice. And then we can collapse those two. We've now just got view of the macros, and we can rename this to Reverb Return Rack. And if you hit this little button up the top right here, that will save it. And then you can add that to one of your collections, drag it to a different folder or whatever, and you have access to this Reverb Return Rack for essentially the rest of your time using Ableton. Now, of course, this isn't limited to just reverbs. You can also do things like delays or distortions or any other kind of effect that you might commonly use on a return chain. Something like a reverb or delay is pretty good, pretty common. But yeah, experiment around with different types of effects and see what you can come up with, and hopefully you can utilize this technique really, really well. So that's it for this video. I hope you learnt something and I hope you got a lot out of it. I'm actually going to put a download for this little rack that I made down in the description box below, so you can just go and download that for free, chuck it in your projects, start using it, muck around with it. If you missed anything during the video, you can go and you can see how I did it. Let me know if you like this kind of shorter form of video as well, and I'll endeavor to do more of these kind of things in the future. But for now, make sure you like, comment, subscribe, all that fun stuff. Follow me over on Instagram, Facebook, wherever you follow people. Sign up to my mailing list as well. You can find a link for that down in the description. And then whenever I release new content, you'll be the first to be notified. And yeah, that's it from me. Hope you're having a good day, and I'll see you in the next video. Peace.